Alright, welcome to Photoshop for Digital Production. In this class, we'll cover everything Photoshop related. So we'll start with a brief history of Photoshop and how it came to exist and become so dominant in the industry. We'll also make sure that our tablet is set up properly, just the basics, so that we can use pressure sensitivity when we actually get to use it. And then I'll cover all the different tools and features that artists generally use in the different various fields of digital arts. And don't worry whether you're just starting or if you're actually experienced in Photoshop, there'll be a large number of exercises for you to practice along the way to make sure that you are as prepared as possible for the rest of the classes. While this is a Photoshop class, you could actually be using anything that is equivalent to it. So most other image editing software should also do the trick, minus some tools and features that they might not have or might have implemented a little bit differently. Such as the one that comes to mind is custom brush creation. So that is going to be pretty specific to Photoshop. As far as the kind of tablet that you'll need for this, well, you don't really need much. If you don't have one yet, I'd simply recommend you get the cheapest Wacom that you can find. I think that is about like $60 US for the cheapest Wacom Intuos. I think it's the Intuos Draw or something like that. And yeah, you should be all set with that. If you have a graphics tablet already, where those where you can actually draw on the screen, that will be a little bit easier for you, especially if you've never done any digital art before. But as I said, there will be plenty of exercises to get you used to using a regular tablet without the screen to draw on. And with all this, let's get started. Before we look at how to actually use Photoshop, let's take a brief look at its history and how it came to exist in the first place. Photoshop was created in 1988 by Thomas and John Knoll, two brothers. Thomas Knoll, who was born on April 14, 1960, was a PhD student at the University of Michigan then, and had started writing a program on his Macintosh Plus. It was a simple software that could do things like adjust the brightness of an image or detect the edges of an object in a photo. This program that he called Display caught the attention of his brother, John Knoll, who was working on something pretty similar. John was then an Industrial Light and Magic employee, and a fun fact, he still is. He is now the chief creative officer, so the CCO at the company. And as I said, he was working on something similar. So as for him, he was born on October 6, 1962. So he is the youngest brother. And he's kind of a badass. So having worked on an insane number of blockbuster feature films, like all the Star Wars movies, Avatar, most of the Pirates of the Caribbean films, and many, many more as the VFX supervisor. And then, quick parenthesis, he got to work on the computer graphics department at ILM thanks to the program that him and his brother were developing. So he got to put it to work on James Cameron's The Abyss the first time. Anyways, partly to make his job easier, he recommended that his brother turn it into a full-fledged image editing software. Thomas then said alright, and took a 6-month break from his studies in 1988 to collaborate with his brother on the program. Thomas renamed the program Image Pro and then renamed it to Photoshop later that year. He worked on a short-term deal with a scanner manufacturer called Barney Scan to distribute copies of the program with a slide scanner, and they sold about 200 copies of Photoshop that way. During this time, John also happened to travel to Silicon Valley and gave a demonstration of the program to engineers at Apple and also to Russell Brown, the art director at Adobe. Both showings were pretty successful, but the Adobe one was especially great because Adobe decided to purchase the license to distribute in September 1988. So just to be clear, they didn't purchase Photoshop then, they just purchased the license to distribute. While John worked on plugins in California, Thomas remained at Ann Arbor writing code for Photoshop. After Adobe tried and failed for months trying to come up with a good name for the software, they defaulted to simply calling it Photoshop. So yeah, it could have been pretty different. So Photoshop 1.0 was released on the 19th of February 1990 for Macintosh exclusively. This first release was a pretty big success. Like the Apple of today, Adobe's key marketing decision was to present Photoshop as a mass market, fairly simple to use tool for anybody, rather than most graphic software at the time, which were aimed at specialists. Up until then, Photoshop had been a Mac-only application, but its success warranted a second and improved version, Photoshop 2. But more importantly, the fast-growing Windows graphics market saw its very first version of Photoshop with version 2.5. So that was kind of a big deal. And then by version 3, Adobe decided that it needed to own the software. So they made the brothers an offer that they could not refuse to flat out purchase Photoshop. And they agreed. So version 3 came out with probably its most important feature ever, even today, layers. I think most would agree that the addition of layers has been, the single most important aspect of Photoshop's development, and probably the feature which finally persuaded many artists to actually try the software. A few other image editing software had it as well, and by that I mean a few, not that many, but their prices made it completely impossible for the general public to afford, so essentially dooming them. Like I briefly mentioned before, it all started with Photoshop 1. The naming convention stuck until Photoshop 7. So, however, in October 2002, following the introduction of Creative Suite branding, each new version of Photoshop was designated with CS plus a number. So, instead of Photoshop 8, for example, you had Photoshop CS, and then instead of the 9th version, you had Photoshop CS2. Again, this stuck around up until version CX6, like most of you can probably remember. And then in June 2013, with the introduction of Creative Cloud branding, Photoshop's licensing scheme was changed again to that of software as a service rental model, and the CS suffixes were replaced with CC for Creative Cloud. And that is how we got to have Photoshop today. Who uses Photoshop? So there are obviously a large number of different type of users for Photoshop, but I like to combine them all in three different groups, like three big groups. The first group consists of photographers or photo editing experts, which is pretty much who Photoshop was initially made for. In the early days, all it was about was editing existing photos. So you would feed Photoshop a photo, and then you would actually, edit the crap out of it. And those people will generally work with existing images, like I said, and try to modify them in some ways. The most obvious example nowadays is probably being in fashion, where artists will take photos from models and just make them look better or different for the magazines. This group will use a lot of touch-up tools, not much of anything else. In the second group, I would include all graphic designers. So those are artists who will generally use Photoshop to create communication tools rather than finished work of art. They could be working on website designs, flyers, graphics for marketing campaign, fonts, logos, UI, and basically any kind of advertising. This group will often work heavily with vectors, path, text, and shapes. And then the third group, and the group in which you're probably a part of, I call the digital artist group. This group will consist of concept artists, illustrators, comic book artists, and many, many more. Basically, most digital artists in the entertainment industry. Those people will generally, and of course there are many, many exceptions here, but they'll generally create something from scratch in Photoshop, something that can be used on its own as the message or the idea itself. So, as opposed to a graphic designer who will generally create the vehicle for a message or an idea, rather than the message or the idea itself. So this group will use things like brushes and blend modes extensively, but rarely touching the tools that graphic designers would use. And so we'll take a look at how each of those groups typically use Photoshop in more details a little bit later. But first, let's take a look at where to actually get Photoshop and what you need to use it. As far as what you'll need, pretty simple: a computer, a drawing tablet, and a Photoshop subscription. So as you know, for a computer, this is, you can pretty much use anything to run Photoshop. I do recommend, however, to have a certain amount of memory, virtual memory, because Photoshop does eat quite a bit of it. So if you have 8, that's probably the bare minimum. So 8 gigs of RAM, for example. But you're probably better off looking at least 16 and more. 16, 32. Because with big files, those are going to that memory is going to be used a lot. So as far as Photoshop now, there you go. This is where you get it. So adobe.com, and we're just going to go ahead and select Photoshop here. So super simple. I just want to show the subscription that you should get if you don't have it already. And this is the first one here, so the photography one. And it's pretty cheap. It's $10 a month, and then you get Lightroom and Photoshop. And there you go. That's all you need. So get that. And this means also that your Photoshop version is going to be the latest all the time. Every time there's a new update, you get to have it. That's the beauty of the subscription. Of course, if you have earlier versions, that works fine as well. I don't think that'll be covering any tool that wasn't in the previous version, at least nothing before CS6, I believe. So as long as you have CS, even CS4 probably, CS4 and up, you're probably fine. All right, when you open Photoshop for the first time, you should see something similar. I have a bunch of last open files, so you might not see those. But what we want to do is go ahead and create a new file. So Control N, or whatever the Mac equivalent of that is, and there we go. So we're going to select a size here, and the first thing that we see is this little window here whenever we create a new file. So let's look at what this is exactly. It's pretty simple. So at the top here you have the name, so you can name your file. We're going to call it demo, and then the document type. So we have a custom, and we're going to keep custom because we'll select our details here manually. And so what we want here, the width and height, we want that to be in pixels. So if it's not, if it's in inches, for example, we want to switch that over to pixels, and then make sure that those are both set to pixels. And we're going to go with a 1920 by 1080 resolution. So this is 1080p. That's the resolution for that. And as far as the resolution here, pixels per inches, this only matters if you were to print the file in question, because you can't have more pixels per inch on paper, but you can't have more pixels per inch on a computer. So that just doesn't make sense. Because that would mean you need to upgrade your monitor if you don't have enough resolution. Anyways, we're gonna keep that at we can set it to something like 300, just in case we ever want to print whatever we're working on. With 300, that should cover pretty much any kind of printer. You should be able to get the maximum resolution out of your printer at 300 pixel per inches. All right, and then the color mode, RGB, color, that's good. Bitmap, we don't want that. Grayscale, that's obviously going to be in grayscale. CMYK here, this is the format that you would need if you want to print something. So it's good to preview it in CMYK because those are the colors that the printer is going to use, and that is different than RGB. And those stands for red, green, blue channels. So the three main channels that you'll find on all computer screens, all the monitors. That's what your monitor is made out of, essentially, just pixels that can display one of those 3 colors. And then for printers, the ink that you'll have is cyan, magenta, yellow, and the K here, and the K refers to the key color, which is black. And then we have lab colors. Lab color, I honestly don't know what this is, and we're not gonna ever use this, so let's skip over that. And then the color mode, we want to be in at least 8-bit. So 8-bit should be pretty good for everything. So for things that are going to be just displayed as is, on the internet. If you were to work on a like a video game or something, and then you knew that your texture would get compressed a lot by the game engine, you would want to crank this up a little bit more. In our case, we're going to leave it like that. This is what you'll use most of the time unless you're in a particular scenario. And then the background content, this is just the color of your background. It's going to be white. We'll leave it like that. And yeah, this is also for color management. This is also for printers most of the time, so we don't want to play with that. We're going to leave it like that. And then there we go. We just hit OK. And we have our new canvas. So when you open Photoshop for the first time, things might not look exactly like what you're seeing right now. So you might not have the color here, you might not have the history, you might not have the navigator. So I'll show you what my setup is and how to achieve kind of like the same look, so we'll be on the same page. And then to do that, it's very simple. You just go to the window here, the window in the menu, and then we're going to select these here. So color, history, layers. Oops, I removed it. I'm going to enable that again. Layers, as I was saying, and navigator. Everything else is unchecked. And of course, as you get, or if you are more familiar with Photoshop, you can enable, disable more of those, depending on your preferences. But for now, this is really good. This is the look of the older versions of Photoshop, so that's why I'm comfortable with this. That's kind of how it used to be displayed before. So yeah, really quickly, we're going to look at everything that we see here. So again, your window here might not be floating this way, so I'll show you how to do that. So the first thing that I want to do when I open a new Photoshop is to go into the preferences. So you go edit, preferences, and then we're going to start with general. Bring that over here. Alright, so in your preferences, there's a lot of stuff here that we don't need to worry about. And the one thing that I always change here is the interface. So you might want to change the color for the interface. If you have a different one, you can play with that. I like, generally speaking, a darker color. It makes it easier on the eye. It's not as bright all the time. And then we'll go to, there we go. So in here, you'll want to enable floating documents. Disable that. And essentially just copy those settings here. This makes it so that it's a little bit easier for the different canvases to manage. So let's say you have a bunch. We're going to create a new one, exactly the same. So I like this way better. Normally, if you have tabs enabled, they'll be at the top here, and you have to select the tabs. I like that it's a little bit more visual this way. We can just drag things around and. But yeah, that's just a preference. So play around with it and see what you prefer. So I'm going to close this one here that we don't need. And then as far as the preferences, that was it. There's nothing else to play with in there. Before we look at the rest of the menus, I want to quickly go into the Wacom settings. Actually, not true. I want to actually go into the Windows settings. So if you're on a Mac, I don't believe this is an issue ever, but if you're on Windows, what I want you to do right now, if you've never done this before, is to disable your right-click equivalent. So it's a setting by default that is always turned on unless you disable it. So you want to go here, pen and touch, click on that, and there's two things that you want to disable, actually three things that you want to disable. So press and hold here is terrible for if you're using a tablet. So we don't want that. And what you'll want to do is go into settings and make sure that this is disabled. So by default it'll be enabled. Just make sure to disable that. Click OK. You go to flicks, get rid of flicks as well. Don't want that. And then go touch, press and hold. Same deal here. You want to disable that, and then just click OK, and you should be all set. as far as those settings go. And then if you have your Wacom tablet drivers installed, this is what it looks like here, the little the settings for this. But what, I never change anything, so again, I would recommend that you don't do either, that you don't do anything in here. Just leave everything in the middle, center. Same with the eraser. This is essentially like the pressure, like if you want to press harder or softer on your screen, you might want to change this, bring it left or right, but I like to leave it default, so I would recommend you do the same until you find a reason to change it. And that's it. So next up, we're going to look at all the menus in here. Okay, so now taking a look at what we see here, there's going to be a recurring theme, and it's going to be that you don't want to change anything pretty much. Alright, so all the things that are here, you don't want to touch them. Again, unless you have a reason to, but in most cases you shouldn't. And this is like super basic stuff, so obviously if you know all this already, you should probably skip ahead. But yeah, right now I'll be covering kind of like the basics so that everybody watching has a good understanding of Photoshop, and then we can move on with more advanced stuff. So here we go. So we're going to look at the menus first, and then the hotkeys, which are pretty important. But first things first, at the top here, what do we have? So we have, obviously, this is going to be similar to any other program. We have a bunch of stuff in here. Obviously there's a lot of important things in here. We're not going to look at that just yet, but the important ones that you want to use for sure is new, open, and save as. So we're going to save our file right now. So we're going to go ahead and go File, Save As, and then I'm going to save it in here, Term 1, Demo, and in terms of file size, so I wanted to do this to show you the different save as type options that we have here. So there's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of different file sizes that are supported by Photoshop, and but there are only a few that you really need to pay attention to. So by default, the default Photoshop format is .psd. So if you just save and then don't select anything and save OK, click save, this is going to be saved as a PSD, and that can only be opened, at least in general, that can only be opened by Photoshop. So this is a good format, if it's a temporary folder, not a temporary folder, a temporary file that you're working on, that you plan to export as a different format later. Leave it in Photoshop as a PSD. That's a good format for something that you're working on. It doesn't compress anything, so it's lossless. Obviously, it's the default format. And the other format that you're probably familiar with is JPEG. This is just a regular compressed image. So whenever you select that, we're going to select. Let's go ahead and select that. This is the options that you have when you save as a JPEG, and then you'll see kind of like a preview of the file size that you're going to be saving. And this is an approximation. It's never always exact, but what you want for something that's going to be displayed online, never go to the maximum. So anything like 10, 11, 12 is always overkill, and you can see like the difference that it makes on the file size here. So 10 going from like 9 to 12, it doubles the file size. So you really don't notice much of a difference between 8 and 12. But look at the file size difference, 77 to 152. So what I like to recommend is 8. 8 is the first, before it's qualified as medium resolution, medium quality. I like to be in high quality, and this is like number 8 is a really good number to have. You don't really notice the compression at all, so it's a good quality image for a really low size. So this is great if you're going to be posting online, on forums, and things like that. It doesn't take much space. Everybody can load it pretty quickly. So good number to keep. And then as far as everything else here, again, leave it the way it is. Baseline standard. That's good enough. And there you go. So that's what you would do. I'm not gonna save it, but I'm gonna look at the different formats here again. So we looked at JPEG. I would say the other two that are kind of important, PNG here is a format that's pretty common online. Again, it's very compressed, but not as much as JPEG, and it's good for graphics, things that need to be like really crisp. All those formats are different ways that Photoshop will compress the file before it saves it. So it's always depending on where it's going to end up. You have to make different choices based on that. So if it's going to end up online for a website, something that needs to go to look crisp and be really quick, you'll want a PNG or a JPEG. If you want something in a video game, for example, something that needs a lot of information to be able to compress it and then generate other images off of it, you'll want something for like a Targa or a TIFF. Those are mostly lossless. They're not lossless completely, but they're very high resolution files, and as a result, the file size is going to be much bigger also, much bigger than a JPEG. But those are good for certain scenarios. So if you want to if you want to save into a format that has excellent quality, for let's say like a photo or something like that, photographers will work with these a lot. And then a couple more that you might be familiar with, the bitmap. It's probably not going to use it ever. And then there's also GIFs, which are right here. So CompuServe GIF or GIF, whatever. But yeah, there you go. So those are the formats that you'll want to pay attention to. All the rest, you can just completely disregard. You'll never use those. So let's go ahead and save it as a JPEG. And there we go. So now our file is saved. Obviously, this is something that you want to do often. There is an option in Photoshop to have an autosave. So let's take a look at that. Because saving is just so important, it's something that will ruin your day if you forget about it, or if your computer crashes or something and you haven't been saving a lot. So I want to make sure that this is out of the way first. We're going to go here in File Handling and make sure that we have automatically saved recovery information every whatever, I like to keep it as low as possible so that I only at the very maximum lose 5 minutes of work, which sometimes is still pretty annoying. But yeah, so whenever the file saves, the file has to save. So let's say you're working on a really big file that takes a while to save, then that might not be ideal for you. So it's it'll interrupt your work every 5 minutes. But for most of the stuff that I do, and I'm guessing that you will too, it's generally speaking like pretty files that are not that massive, where it takes a couple seconds to save. It's normally pretty much instant. So yeah, the lower the value here, the better. Just make sure that you're not gonna lose anything. And then that's pretty much it. So make sure to have that set up. There we go. At the top here, what we have. So this here is all the different presets that you have. I'm not going to use that much. This is your all your different brushes. So you can click on that, and I'll show you all the brushes that you have. Obviously, your on your side is going to be a little bit different. Those are all my custom brushes, but there's one that I want you to select, and it's a soft brush like this. So you can, that's a Photoshop default. So just you just scroll through what you have and find one that looks kind of like this, just like a soft edges. And yeah, and then select it. So that's that. And then if you click here, the little folder with a bucket with brushes in it, that'll bring up the brush tab. And then this is where you would edit your brush. We're not going to do that just yet. We will cover it later though. But yeah, don't freak out. There's a lot of stuff here, but it's actually pretty simple to get around this. Not get around, but to understand what this is all about. And then next here we have the mode, normal. This is the blend mode. So whatever you're painting with, it's going to have a particular blend mode. So by default, it's a normal blend mode. It looks like this. And then if you change this, let's say we change it to multiply, then that's going to be doing something different. So if you're just painting over the white part where there's no paint yet, no digital paint yet, it'll look exactly the same. But the second that you paint over something that's already there, you'll see the color is actually multiplied. So each of these modes do something different. So let's say you go overlay, you'll see if I go over something, it's different again, like it brightens it. And then, as I said, those are all different, and they all do something similar in the sense that they modify how the color behaves, how the color is added on top of existing color, but they're all obviously different. So we'll look at those, obviously later, more in detail. The opacity here, this is how opaque your brush is. So if you're ever drawing and you're like, what the hell, like nothing's happening, I have a color selected and nothing's happening, always make sure to look at your mode here, make sure that it's set to normal. Because if it's overlay, as you can see, like I'm trying to brighten something with a color, but the color is already white, so it can't be brighter than this. Obviously it wasn't working. So make sure to look at this first, whenever something's not working. There we go. So the opacity here, we can drop it to 50%, and this is how opaque your brush stroke is going to be. So this is 50%, this is 12%, as you can see, not much, and then 100% at the top here. There you go. So yeah, this can be used for a variety of purposes. Next here, what we have is a button that you should not select. So what this does is that, especially if you set up your pen properly, you'll notice here, let's say I do a switch to black so that's a little bit more visible. If you press hard, it goes like, it creates a really dark color. But if you press really lightly, as you can see here, it's not much opaque at all. It's pretty faint. And then you can go light and then press harder and harder and harder, and then you get kind of like this nice gradient. But this is all managed by the brush itself. So when you selected that soft brush here, that brush comes with its own settings. All of this here are the settings for that particular brush that you selected. If you click here, what this does is that it tells Photoshop to ignore whatever you have selected here as far as the opacity goes, and then always apply the pressure sensitivity whenever you do a brush stroke. So this might not be good, at least in most cases. Let's say you have something like a very particular settings. Let's say that your opacity never goes below 50% or something like that. The second that you trigger that, this is what's going to happen to your brush here. So whatever you have here is what will happen instead of the settings that you carefully selected. So I recommend to never touch this, never select that. It's doesn't help. And then the flow here, pretty similar to opacity. It's how much paint comes out at once. So let's go and erase a little bit of this. So I'm going to select the black again because the black is pretty obvious. And actually I'm going to select a different brush. So that's a little bit more obvious what I'm doing. And don't worry, like you see the size changing here. I'll explain all of that later. But this here, the flow, if it's at 100%, that's what it looks like. And then if you drop it to 50, press just as hard, that's what it looks like. If you drop that to like 10%, press just as hard, this is what it looks like. So you can kind of see the difference here. It's just there's more paint that comes out. It's very similar to opacity, except if you stay in one spot and then keep painting, it'll get darker and darker and darker. It's like a can of paint, if you keep spraying in one spot, it'll get darker. I'll do the same thing here, but flow at 100% and then opacity at 10%. And you'll see what happens with opacity. If I start drawing with opacity, like this, it doesn't matter. Like as long as I don't let go, it's never gonna get any darker. It's just like the opacity that I choose, that as in one click, that's as dark as it'll get. As opposed to flow here, if you, without letting your pen off the screen, if you go like this and you paint, oops, it's 100%, obviously it's not gonna work. But if you set it to the same thing here, and and you go like this, see, like I just let my finger the pen on the surface of the screen, or on the surface of the tablet, and then it kept adding and adding and adding and adding, just like a real can of paint. So very different. Again, like most of these things here, you're not gonna play with, so I'll leave it at 100%. And this here, I'm gonna deselect, because this again overrides whatever I have selected in my brush presets, so I don't want that. And then the next one here is to always use pressure for size. So if I select this and I press just a little bit, the size of the brush is going to be really small, as you can see here. You get a variation, as opposed to when it's not selected, it's just always the same size. But again, this overrides what I had selected. So this brush that I have here, it doesn't vary in size by choice. I made it this way. That's what I wanted it. That's how I wanted it to behave. So if I go and select that, then after the fact, then it just overrides, the settings that I had carefully selected in here. So again, turn this off. You don't need that. Everything will be managed by the brush itself. And then for as far as brush settings here, to keep it simple, that's all we're going to look at now. Again, I said we're going to look at the brush creation process a little bit later, but that's more advanced. So for now, let's keep it simple. All right, going to erase all of this stuff. And so the rest of the menus here, all the tools that are available for Photoshop are pretty much found here. So there's all the things that you can do to an image. Of course, there's more of those in here. So there's adjustments that you can do, but the ones that you use most of the time, they're all going to be found here. And of course, those are all accessible through through hotkeys. So we'll look at what this does later, but for now, there's only one that I want to show that's pretty important, and that's the color one. So there's going to be two little boxes here, one in front and one in the back. The one on the front here, if you click on this one, it's going to bring up a color picker, or you have the same thing here if you have later versions of Photoshop. And if you have CS6 or below, you're not going to have this. So instead, you have to go and click in here. I'm going to select like a red or something. So what this does, the first one, the square that's above, is what you use to paint with. The square that's underneath is what you use to erase with. So it's kind of like the size, the color of your canvas. So if you want your canvas, if you want to erase to black, for example. So right now I'm just drawing, but if I choose the eraser here, this one right here, the eraser, and then if I try to erase, it'll erase in black. So that doesn't make much sense, in most cases. But then you look here and you're like, oh, because the color of my background now is set to black. So that's what it's erasing to. It's considering that the white here is something that I actually painted, because the real color of my background is what I have selected here on the square that's underneath. So it's trying to erase and to get back that color. So whenever, if you're trying to erase and it's not erasing to white, this might be the problem here. So you might want to click on here, select white, and then when you erase, then it'll erase to white. There we go. So this can be useful, depending if you have if you're working on a black background, or if you want a background that's different than white, and when you erase, you don't want it to always go to white. So I'll do a quick example. So let's say I have I want a background this color, and then I've been drawing, with different blues on it, like that, beautiful. And then let's say I draw with this color here, and I make a mistake. I'm like, oh no, I didn't want to do this. So of course you can Control Z, but let's say you want to erase for some reason. So if I select the eraser right now and I try to erase this, oh wait, what the hell? Now it's erasing to white because it's considering that white is your actual background color. But if you wanted to erase to this color, for example, like this taupe color, what you could do is click on the little square here that represents the background color, and then color pick. So click on the taupe, and then click OK. And then when you erase, again, I still have my eraser selected, but now when I erase, it erases to that color instead. So that's what this is. There you go. So that's what this does. So foreground color, background color, pretty important to know what this is. The little arrow on top here switches it, so you can invert them if you want. And then if you click the black and white here, it resets it to its normal value of black foreground, white background. All right. And then on the other side, really quickly, what I like to have here is the navigator. The navigator just allows you to maximize and minimize the size of your image really quickly by just moving the slider here. There are hotkeys for that too, but I don't know, this works better for me for some reason. And of course, if it's really big, if you're working up close, you can see here, you can drag the little square. This represents what you see on the canvas, so you can easily know where you are, at any time. So if you're like, where is this? Is this the right corner or the right? You just look up here and you're like, oh, okay, this is where I am. And then I select also the history block here, and this is really easy if you want to go back in time. So let's say you made a bunch of stuff, you made a bunch of changes, and you're like, I don't like this. You can go back in time, click, 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 skip some, and revert and go back to what you used to have before. So you have, depending on your settings, you'll have a set number of history steps that you can go back to. I think the maximum, well, actually, let's find out. I think the maximum is 1,000. Let's go into general, file handling, performance. So if you go here in your performance menu, you'll see here the history states. This is how many history states you'll be able to rewind to. So by default, it's not that much. I think by default it's like 50 or something. So you might want to crank this up. Understand that the higher this is, the more memory it takes. But at the same time, if you only have like 20 or 50, and there's like 100 changes that you want to go back to, you won't be able to, because it'll only be able to rewind 50 states, 50 actions essentially. So I have it set to the maximum, and this way, I can always go back to something that I've done previously. So the history is pretty useful. And then it comes with properties here and actions. These two you can ignore really for now. Doesn't matter. And then the last one, the color one's pretty simple. It's the same thing as here. So whenever you click on here, it brings up the color picker. This is exactly the same thing. It's just a little bit more convenient because it's already on the menu. So, and then the last thing here that I did is the layers tab. So super important, this thing. This is where you'll manage the majority of your files. So let's say you have a bunch of layers. Those are all going to be in here. That's where you name them. That's how you create groups. That's how you manage your file within Photoshop. So very, very important little block here to have. And we can look also at the channels here. So the channels, like I mentioned briefly before, the RGB channels, so red, green, and blue. Right now, they're obviously all visible. That's why we see all the colors. But for some reason, if you want to only look at certain channels, you can just hide them. So right now, I'm only looking at the blue channel. Right now, only looking at the green channel, and etc., etc. And then here's another thing here, really quickly. The little eye that I was clicking is to make something visible or not. So right now all the eyes are open. That means I'm looking at all the channels at the same time. But if I want to hide a channel, I can close the eye on it, and it'll hide the green channel and show everything else. So yeah, that's like the visibility for that particular layer. And I'm not going to go into layers more just yet. We'll cover a little bit. We'll cover that a little bit later. But yeah, as far as the menus, this is pretty much it. So now that we've looked at everything that is visible, at least had a quick look at everything that's visible, let's talk about the stuff that's invisible. So all the hotkeys that you should know. So there's a couple one right off the bat that are pretty important. So One is the space bar. So whenever you hold you press and hold the space bar, it'll bring the little hand here, and this hand allows you to move around the canvas. So right now it's full screen, you can't really move. But if you go a little bit bigger here, where you're not seeing the entire canvas, and then you try again, click and drag, then you can move your way around the image. So right now we have this view. So the next one I want to talk about is the F hotkey. So right now we have this floating window here. But if you want, and then as you saw, if I try to move around here, it doesn't work. So sometimes you want if you're working in a corner like this, you want this to be in the center. And to do that, you can rotate to the different views that you have in Photoshop. So that's the F hotkey. So you press F, it'll go to this mode here, which is kind of like not full screen, but like it uses the entire Photoshop window, so that you can drag the thing out, and then you can use the drag option regardless, if you're full screen or not. So I really like this mode. This is the mode that I use most of the time. And then there's another one, a third mode. If you press F again, and it's the full screen mode. So if you have all the tools that you need somehow, or if you know all your hotkeys and you don't need any of the menus, then you can use this mode. It's obviously less distracting because there's nothing else. There's no UI. So yeah, I never use this mode because I always want to either do something in the menus, but yeah, it exists if you want to use it. So the one that I like I said, is the one where you don't see the window. So I press F again, and this one here. So there we go. This is the mode that I like. This is the one that I recommend because it's easier to move around. Let's say you want to focus on something. There's no it doesn't matter if you're outside the boundaries of the actual canvas, it'll let you go there. So it'll let you go in here, and otherwise it wouldn't. Alright, and then the other hotkey. So to go to your hotkeys and to look at them all, you can go keyboard shortcuts here, and then you will see there's a crap ton of them. So there's almost all the letters on your keyboard are assigned to something. So there's one in particular that I really like to change whenever I open Photoshop. So you can change your brush size pretty easily now. There's like real hotkeys for that, and I'll show you right now. So with a tool that can change in size, so obviously if you click the paint bucket, that's not going to work. But if you click the eraser tool or any other tool that can change in size, what you do to change your brush size, you press Alt, and then you press your right click on your pen, and then you can drag the size of your brush. So now it's a big brush. I do the same. Now it's a small brush. So this is not, you have to do this command while the pen is not touching the screen or the tablet, otherwise it's not going to work. So as long as you're not touching it, you can click and drag, as long as you're kind of hovering over the tablet or the screen. But I'll show you something else that I prefer to this. So let's go back in here, keyboard shortcut. I'm going to go in Tools, so that's good. Scroll all the way down almost until you see Decrease brush size and Increase brush size. So as you can see here, those are different than what you see on your end probably. What I like to do is change those to C and V. So whenever you press V, it goes up. So you can change those really easily. You just click and then you press the letter that you want, and then you hit OK. And what this does is all I have to do here is press V a bunch of times, and you can see my brush is growing. And then if I press C on the other hand, it shrinks. So you can press, or you can press and hold, and then it grows faster and it shrinks faster. So I really like this shortcut. It's a lot easier. And then with the C and the V, it's close to Alt, which Alt is another really important hotkey. Alt brings up the color picker. So whenever you want to pick a color that's on the canvas already, or even not, something that's outside, you press Alt and then you click on something, and then you'll see here in the little box here the color changes because that's what's being selected. So yeah, the Alt, the color picker hotkey is super helpful because oftentimes you'll find a color, instead of having to go here and choose your color, you have a color probably that's on your canvas that you can't use. So let's say I want to use like this like faint red color. Just color pick it, and now I can paint with it. Or if I want this one here, for example, there we go, and then this one here, and then this one here, and then this one here. As you can see, it's super quick to change color this way. And then obviously the more colors you have on your canvas, the more options you have when it comes to color picking. But so yeah, color picker super important as well. And yeah, so far we have C and V to make the brush size bigger or smaller. We have the space bar to click and drag your canvas around, and then you have Alt to color pick different colors. And for all the other tools, what you can do here, you can always mouse over it and leave your mouse there, and it will tell you the hotkey for it. So for if you want to do a square selection, for example, it tells you here it's M. So rectangular marquee tool. So let's go ahead and press M. There we go. When you do, it changes to that tool, and then you can use it right away. So now I have a selection. If I press, what is the brush? So this is my brush here, a regular brush from the brush tool. You press B, and then you're back into brush mode, and then you can keep on painting. And then you're painting within that selection. But yeah, as far as the ones that I wanted to quickly cover for the introduction, this is pretty much it. So next up, we're going to go into much more detail. We have a good basic setup for of hotkeys now. We know the major ones, the ones that are important. Of course, if you're not sure, make sure to write those down. I'll include here a cheat sheet for your keyboard so that you can always know what each of the keys are going to do. But remember, this is a default. This is a default Photoshop setting. So if you change anything in here, obviously it's going to be different. But yeah, it's a good one to get started. Again, if you don't want to do the CNV thing, you don't. That's the only hotkey that I'll change ever. Everything else is default. I like to keep Photoshop as default as possible, so it's easier. It's easier to teach, and it's easier to just get in for anybody. So that being said, again, I'm going to move on to the next chapter, and we'll look at all those different tools, all those different features from the point of view of different artists that would use Photoshop. So we're going to start here with photo editing. So this is I'm going to try to cover not all the tools, but a good amount of tools that photo editors would normally use on a daily basis. There's a lot of tools in Photoshop that obviously we're not going to have time to cover because they're sometimes a little bit more obscure, or they're just different ways to achieve the same results. So if I were to teach all the tools in Photoshop, it would probably take days and weeks maybe. It's just a lot of stuff in there. But right now, photo editing is a good way to start because we're not going to be creating anything. Essentially, we're just going to be manipulating things that already exist. So it's a good way to ease into the program and get familiar with kind of like the more basic tools, and be able to navigate around and do a couple things. And then from there, we'll up the complexity, and then we'll do things that are a little bit more challenging. But for now, for this first phase here, there's a lot of basic tools that we really need to get good at using. And the first one of those is going to be layers. So there's a couple that I'm going to be talking about here. Just a heads up, it's going to be layers. It's going to be I'm going to be talking about groups, selections, masks, different ways to adjust your image, so different image adjustments, healing, cloning, liquify, and transforms on your image. So there's a lot of stuff here, but you'll see it's actually, pretty simple. They're very powerful tools that allow you to do a lot of different things. So they're also pretty core to Photoshop, which is why I wanted to cover those in the first place, and cover them first. So first things first, layers. So layers probably the most important of them all. Here, as you can see, we're working on a background layer. So this is for this image here. So I have 3 different images here that we'll be, playing with, having a little bit of fun with. The first one being this one here, and this is just a photo that we took from a trip in Japan, and this is matcha tea. And the layers tab here, so there's a couple things that we can look at. For now, all we're gonna be paying attention to is this little icon here, which this one creates a new layer. So if we click it, a new layer comes up on top, always on top, on top, on top. It's like a stack, like a deck of cards. You keep adding cards on top of the deck. But then all those cards are also transparent, so you can see through unless you draw on the cards. So it's a good way to imagine that. It's really like very similar to a deck of cards that you keep adding onto. So this layer that I just added, obviously we don't see anything, there's nothing on this layer. So you can tell by looking at the little image here, when it's a bunch of like squares, gray and white squares like this, like a checker pattern, that means that it's completely empty. So then you can double click on that to rename it. Right now it's layer 1, you can change the name, whatever. And there we go. Now I'm going to create a couple more. And those layers, just really quickly on how to organize these things here. It's like regular folders on your computer, so you can group them as well. So let's say you have these 3 here, 1, 2, 3, and I want to group them. You can click the little folder icon here, and it'll create a group. And the group will always be called group 1. Then the second one will be called group 2 and 3 and 4 and so on. And you can expand this little group here by clicking on it, so that you can see what's inside of it. And you can see that those things are within a group because there's a little bit of an indentation here, so they're not like flush with the other ones, the initial ones. But yeah, those are in a group, so you can close and open your groups. And of course you can have groups with groups inside. So let's say I'm in this group here, and to make a group also we can just hit Control G. There we go. Now we have a group inside a group. And but there's nothing on those layers, so we're not actually seeing anything. But let's delete all of these. So to delete layers, you can click on them and drag them onto the little trash icon here, or you can just click the trash icon with the layer that you want gone. Click it, and then it's gone. So this is how you manage your layers. Pretty simple so far. Now, what happens if you have multiple layers on top of each other? So let's say I'm gonna do a brush stroke like this. So this is on one layer, and then I create a new layer with a different shade of blue like this. So I'm always painting on top of the previous layer. And I'm gonna create a new one, go for something that's a little bit more green. Alright, so there we go. So now I have 3 different layers on top of my background layer, and then I can hide them, hide certain ones by clicking the little eye icon, like we've seen previously, and this will just hide the ones that I don't want. And of course, once I have this, I can rearrange them. But as you can see here, this one, for example, like the light green one, if I push it below the blue one, the middle blue one, now we can't see it anymore because it's behind this one, and this one is bigger and is covering it. So yeah, you can rearrange them however you want. And then what we have up here, so this here where it says normal, it's very similar to this one here. So the brush mode here that we talked about previously, you have different options here for when you draw brush strokes, and you have the same for layers. So those layers can have different blend modes as well. So let's say this by default, obviously they're all set to normal, as you can see here. but I can change that, and we can go for something like an overlay. So this one here, whatever is on this layer is gonna act as an overlay for the other ones. Overlay is the name of the effect, the blend mode. So I can select another one, soft light, this is what that does. Hard light, this is what that does. Hard mix, multiply. So different ones create different effects. And yeah, so with this you can do like some pretty cool stuff, depending what you have on each layer and what kind of blend modes that you use. And then over here we have the opacity of the layer. So very similar to the opacity of your brush stroke. If we lower the opacity of our layer, it'll start to disappear all the way down to 0, where it becomes invisible. And if we crank this back up, there we go. And now let's say we have a group instead. So I'm going to group those, Control G. Now the group has the same options as you can see here. So now instead of changing the opacity on one of those layers, I'm changing the opacity on the group, and the group contains those two layers. So those two layers are going to be affected by the change in opacity, as you can see. So yeah, you can group different things here, and then the same way here you have different options. So instead of having only one of those layers have a blend mode, you can select the entire group and have that have a blend mode of its own. And we're going to stop here as far as layers and groups. So that covers it pretty well. This is going to bring us into the different selection options that we have here in Photoshop. So all these first three icons here, those are all selections. So you have kind of like the more basic selections: rectangular, elliptical, single row. So these two kind of useless. So the first two here are the ones that you'll be using most of the time. So rectangular selection. There you go. So now you have a selection, and then you can move that selection if you click in the center and then drag it around. You also have the circle one. There we go. So if you click inside the shape, you'll just move it around, but then if you click outside the shape, you'll create a new shape. And then you can create additional shape by holding Shift. So as you can see here, Shift is selected. It's written whenever you press it. It tells you that it's selected, that you're pressing it. And then if you click, you can also notice you have a little plus icon. So if you click while this is selected with the little plus icon, it will add to the selection. So I can do it again, plus, there we go. So now my selection is all of this. And then if you want to subtract from the selection, you can click Alt. As you can see, it's selected now, and then there's a minus right next to the little cross here. So if you do another selection with the minus on, it deselects instead. So you can remove from your selection this way. So add selection, remove selection. Now down here, the next one is the lasso tool. So lasso tool, those are all pretty much, those are all pretty useful. So lasso tool, the regular one, the first one, is just freehand. So you can just, you draw whatever you want, and then that's the second that you let go, it closes the shape on its own, and that's your selection. I can also use this one here, so polygonal lasso tool. So this one, it sticks. So it's like you're drawing points, and then those points will just connect. And if you double click, it closes the loop. So this is good, especially if you have a very complex selection that you want to make. And if you wanted to select something at any point, let's say you made a selection and you're like, I don't want this selection, you can click Control D to deselect. Control D. Alright, so that's the hotkey for it. Pretty useful. And sometimes you'll make a little selection like this, or even smaller than this, and you don't notice it. And then you're trying to draw somewhere and you're like, it doesn't work, why can't I draw? When you can't, it's very likely because you have a selection somewhere. And then normally when you have a selection, you can only draw within that selection. That's the whole point of having selections. So if you're trying to draw red here, I'm like, it doesn't work. It's because you can only draw in the selection that you have right here. So undo that. So if you want to draw elsewhere, click Control D to remove your selection. So sometimes your selection will be something like this right here in the corner, and you just don't see it, right? You're drawing, you're like, I don't have a selection, there's nothing here. Why can't I draw it? It's not working. So the first thing is you should try when that happens, instead of trying to look, for the couple pixels that are selected in your image, just hit Control D, try again, and most of the time that will solve it. So most of the time it's because you had a selection that you didn't see. Then I'm going to try the last one here, magnetic lasso tool. So this one, it works or not. It really depends on a lot of different things. It depends how much contrast there is between the things that you're trying to select. So we'll try it here. I have a nice bright outline here for this bowl, so I might be able to get a nice selection of it. So I'm going to Control D to deselect whatever I had, and then you can just start clicking, and then you can see what it tries to do. I'm not doing anything, I'm just moving my pen along this line, and it's sticking to it. As you can see, it's always trying to stick to it, and it'll try to stick to the contour of the cup as best as it can. And then you can also help it. So whenever you click somewhere, if I go all the way here and then I decide to click, you can add your own points. And then if you did that, for example, and you're like, I don't want to undo everything, I just want to undo these things here, you can press on delete on your keyboard. So delete removes the last point, the last anchor point. Delete, 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 and we are back here. And then you can keep going on. So let's say you made a mistake here, like it's not quite following the edge. You can delete a couple times. Go back here on delete, delete, and then click manually on the outside of the cup to force it to hug it properly. So in this case, like the reason why it's not hugging to the edge that well, because the contrast between those two colors is not that great, and it's kind of blurry too, so Photoshop is not too sure where the line should be. But anyways, I'm gonna hit escape, and when you hit escape, when you hit delete, it removes the last anchor. When you hit escape, it just removes the entire selection, so it just cancels the selection. So if you want to get out of it, that's what you do. And so yeah, that's those are the three ways that you can select things. Again, this last one here, the magnetic lasso tool, works really well for things that are really contrasting and really crisp. So if you have if your image quality is kind of low, like this one here, you can kind of see the pixels, it's gonna have a harder time. But if you have a really crisp with like sharp angles and like really high contrasts, that's going to be the results are going to be a lot better. So I'm going to switch to the polygonal lasso tool. This is my favorite one, just because it gives us a little bit more control. And now we're going to see what we can do with those selections. So now that we know how to create those selections, what can we do with this? So let's say I want to try to change the color of the T. So I want to make it, like red or orange, for example, or blue. So I'm going to select the T here, and of course it's not going to be perfect. It's a selection, and there's no gradient on the edge. It's whatever is selected is like there's going to be, the pixels are selected themselves. There's no blur in between. So if you zoom in here, you can see, all those pixels. Those are all the pixels that make this image. If you zoom in, you can see them all individually. And then, if you want to be like super precise, you can add to the selection. Let's say right now I can click Shift and then select a little bit more here. So maybe something like this. And then I'm going to double click to close the loop. There we go. And then I can zoom out, inspect my selection. Alright, so this is going to do for now. And then what you can do with selections, you can do a lot of stuff. So obviously, when you have a selection, everything that you do from this point on until you remove the selection, until you deselect, is going to only be applied to your selection. So let's say you're drawing something, so you're painting, it's going to only paint within the selection, and then everything else as well. So if you erase, it's going to only erase within that selection. But now let's take a look at the different things that we could do with this. So there's a bunch of image adjustments that are pretty cool. So the ones, obviously there's a lot of them in here. We're not going to cover them all, but we'll cover a couple of those. Levels, curves, and color, saturation, hue, and color balance. Those are the ones that we're going to be looking at. All the other ones, you can try them. They're just kind of like variations of those. So the first one we're going to try here is levels. And then also you can see here when you go, it tells you the shortcut for this. So levels, Control L, curves, Control M. So there we go. When you click on levels, or when you click on Control L, this is what comes up. And then we'll see, there's a lot of stuff in here, but basically you're playing with the brightness of the image. And what you see here, it's exactly that. It's the curve of values for the image. So you're not going to be modifying the colors in here. You'll be tweaking how bright or how dark certain ranges of colors are. So, I mean, to put it simply, you can it makes your image brighter or lighter, whatever you have selected, and then you can play with these things here. Most of the time what it'll be used for is things like you want something not as dark, or you want the highlights not as bright. So for something like this, let's say I want the highlights on here are a little bit too intense, so maybe I want to drop them a little bit. Make the T appear a little bit darker or drier or something like that. And then you can hit OK. And then there you go. So now I can click Control D to deselect. And now I have kind of like this old looking T. But as you can see, if we look up close here, where my selection was, there's like a clear outline there, and that doesn't look that great. So what we're going to do is unselect. So selections were great most of the time. For certain things. So there's definitely value there for certain things, but in this case it really didn't work out that great because my edges were soft. Like there's a nice kind of like gradient there. So if it was something like sharper like this, let's say I want to change the color of this roof right here, you can just select that really quickly. This. And now what I'm going to do is bring up another one of these here, another of the adjustments, and we're going to play with color balance. Color balance this time. So Control B. So those are the 4 ones. Control B, Control U, Control M, Control L. Control B, color balance. So this one's nice. This one is just you tint whatever you have selected. So in this case, I have the little roof selected. I can tint it. It's a lot more visual than levels, for example. So if I want it to be a little bit more red, I push the slider towards the red. If I want a little bit more magenta, I push the slider towards the magenta. And then you can do the same with the shadows. Right now I'm doing the mid-tone, so all the mid values is what I'm changing right now. The shadows are going to be all the darker values of color, the darker colors. Those are going to be the ones that are affected by this change here. And then of course the highlights also. So if I want the highlights to be a different color than my shadows, then I can play with all those 3 options here. But let's push that to red. I'm just doing something really random here. And then with the little preview here, all those different adjustments, image adjustments have a preview checkbox here. And if you deselect it, it goes to what it actually is. And then when you select the preview, it'll show you what the result would be. So there we go. So before that's what it was, and now that's what it is. So I'm gonna hit OK on that. And as you can see, you can't really see the outline because it's already pretty sharp, and that works a lot better than it did for the T here. But when selections are not enough, there's another thing that you can use, and that's called masks. So you can use masks instead. Masks are like selections, as we've seen here. it's black or white, really. Either the pixel is selected or it's not, and then there's nothing in between. If you paint on one side, it's going to only paint on this side. But with masks, what's nice is that that selection can actually have a nice fade. It doesn't have to be that one line. It can actually be a fade, like a gradient. So this means that instead of having this sharp line, I'll have this nice gradient on the edge here, where the liquid meets the bowl. So we're going to do just that. And there's a bunch of different ways to create masks. We're going to look at a couple of them. The first one is going to be the quick masks. So it's this little icon here right underneath the color picker. So right here. You can also press on Q. As you can see, it tells you to enter quick edit, quick mask mode. You press Q and you'll see it selects this thing here. And then something, as you can see here, when you press that, actually you can't really see, but now I'm going to select a different color. When you click that, watch the color here change. It automatically changes to black. Masks are pretty interesting. They're like only one channel. There's only two colors that they can have, like those channels here, you know, like the channels on your image, the blue, green, and red. When you look at them individually, it's black and white. They're always black and white. If you hide one, if you only look at one of them at a time, the green channel is just a black and white channel. The blue channel is just black and white image. But then when you combine them all, you get a color image. A mask is essentially just one channel. It's like this. It's a black and white image, which is why when you select the mask, it goes to black and white, because those are the only two values that the mask will understand. And those values, what they mean is basically when it's black, it's like there's nothing. The mask is not there. The mask part is the white part. So whenever you have something that is white, that is going to be your selection. So, you know, we're talking in terms of selections. Instead of having like a lasso tool and then you create kind of like a circle or something like that. In that case, you know, if I were to do a selection, a good old selection like this, this inside, whatever is selected, this would be my white. White is the selection. Everything else would be the black. Okay, so I'm going to deselect that, and now we're still in the mode. And when you draw in quick mask mode, it's you're drawing with this red color. So, you know, nothing's broken. That's how it should be. But yeah, so what this allows you to do is, instead of having a super sharp line, you're able to have some nice gradients, as you can see here. So if you don't press too hard, you can have some very, very subtle gradients. And so I'm going to try that with a different brush, the good old brush that I told you to select at the beginning, so the soft round brush. And what we're going to do is we're going to paint kind of like the edge of the T here. And as you can see, it's not a sharp line. It's kind of like soft a little bit because the brush is soft. The brush has soft edges. Okay, so let's say I've selected pretty much everything. So of course, you know, you could go in here and zoom in and actually make sure that your line is nice and clean. But for the purpose of this, it's pretty good. So now, you know, it looks like most of it is selected. And what happens now, so I'm going to exit that mode and you'll see what happens here. So everything is selected but the T. So obviously that's not what I want, but that's fine because that creates a problem and now we have to solve it. And allow me to introduce the invert selection tool. So we can go here. It is select, and you can click on inverse, or click Shift Control plus I. So Shift Control plus I. That's something that you should remember. So when you do this, look at the selection here. It's going to inverse that selection. There we go. So now it used to select everything. Now only this is selected. So now if I draw in here, only that part is selected. And then I want you to pay attention to the edge here. So, you know, before it was black or white, you're either inside the line or you're out. But with this one here, look at what happens. So it's bleeding because we painted the mask, and the mask was not a straight line. It was not black or white. It was an actual gradient to it. So now, if I paint everything, and I click Control D to deselect, you'll see it's not a clear-cut line. It's a nice, soft gradient there. So I'm going to undo that. Control Z. And then to do multiple Control Z, you'll see with Photoshop it's a little bit different than most software. If you click Control Z repeatedly, it'll just go back and forth between those two, as you can see here. Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. So that's not how you do it. To do multiple Control Z and to go back, into the history queue here, you have to click Control Alt Z. Then when you do, I have those pressed right now. So Control Alt, and then when you press Z, Z, Control Alt Z, Control Alt Z, Control Alt Z. Like it goes back further. So that's a little quirk that Photoshop has. Now going back to what we were doing before with this T here. So let's say I want to make it darker. I'm going to go back here, go into the adjustments options, and then so right now we did the color balance, we did levels. So let's go ahead and do curves. So we're going to try another one and see, if we get a better result now that we have a soft selection instead of a hard selection. So we're going to do a couple things here. And then curves, very, very similar to the levels that we were playing with before. And so it's one of those options that they're just the more complex versions of this one right here, of brightness contrast. So levels, curves, those allow you to do a little bit more than brightness contrast. So we can look at brightness contrast. As you can see here, it's pretty limited, right? There's brightness and then there's contrast. So those are the two that you can play with. With the other ones here, the ones that I was using just now with the curves, it's essentially the same thing. So as you can see, like it does similar results, but you have a lot more control. So that's kind of like the beauty of these things. And you can also go into the different channels. Right now I'm affecting the entire image, all the channels, but I can impact a single channel instead. So in this case, I can change the color this way. So go to the blue, change the blue color. So that looks kind of weird. And then yeah, there's a bunch of different options here. I'm not going to play with those. Not really useful for most people. What you'll want to pay attention to here is those curves here. And then whenever you click on the curve, it creates a new little point that you can use to drag around and edit that curve, and you can have as many as you want, obviously. And then I'm just going to hit, well, you can also do the preview, like I said before, after. We're going to leave it. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to then Control D to deselect and see what it looks like. So now, before we had this like really sharp, ugly line, but now it actually works quite well. So the color is really bad, but at least the image works. It doesn't look broken. Now if I want to do the same thing but in a non-destructive way, meaning that I'll be able to just toggle it on and off whenever I want with a layer, I can create a layer, something that you call a layer mask. And then the way to do this is you click on the little circle here, the black and white circle. And those are all the different things here that we can do to it. And as you can see here from this list, it's very, very similar to the things that you can do here. So you can do the same thing this way. So we're going to go ahead and select kind of what we did before. So we're going to go ahead and do a, let's see, the last one that we haven't tried is hue saturation. So this is the fourth one that I wanted to talk about, so I might as well do it right now. And as you can see here, when you click on that, it creates a mask, so a black and white image. And then the way that this is set up is that this here is affecting the image underneath. So it affects everything that is underneath, but only in the white portion. Alright, so what this looks like is, let's say I try to change the hue and saturation here, and this is where it pops up in the properties. So whenever I click on here, it'll bring up the menu, and then to get that menu back, so if you click somewhere else, right, if you deselect, it'll hide the menu again. But all you have to do is click on the name, and it'll bring back the things that you can do to it. So in the case of hue and saturation, those are the sliders that you have. So don't worry about default preset or master, all that stuff. Don't worry about that. The things that you want to play with is this one here, the slider at the top and the slider in the middle. And sometimes this one here, but this never gives really good results, so better not to play with it. So we're going to drop that to 0. And so yeah, so the saturation, obviously, if you drop this down all the way down, it's going to get rid of all the saturation, so all the color is going to be gone. It's going to turn into a black and white image. And then if you bring this up, it's going to saturate it, so it's going to add more and more color to it. So sometimes, it starts to break. Right now it looks like something radioactive, so you don't want to go too hard on this, but let's say I crank it up a little bit, and now I can change the colors. So this will change the entire color of the whole thing, so you get some really cool effect this way. So right now I have some purple matcha. There we go. And then since I have a nice masked selection, I get this nice gradient, so there's no like harsh line for between the two. So it looks really nice. It looks pretty convincing from a distance. Actually pretty good up close as well. So what is this? What is this whole thing? What the beauty with this having having this layer mask as an actual layer is that you can toggle it on and off. So if I just hide it, there you go, it's gone. I can bring it back. And since it's a layer, I can still do everything that I normally can do to a layer. So I can, as you remember, you can play with the opacity. So I can do it so that's just a little bit purple. And then it turns kind of gray. That looks delicious. And then yeah, so you can drop the opacity down to nothing, or you can set it to the maximum, or whatever, anything in between. You can change the blend mode, of course, to overlay, to soft light, to whatever you want. To multiply, to darken, to get the effect that you want, the desired effect. But that's the power of this. So quick mask mode it's pretty nice, to get started. But you don't want to stay with this unless you're working on something and you just want to do a quick selection real quick, really fast, and then you're never going to go back to it again. But generally speaking, when you do when you do a big change like this, you want to have the flexibility to go to it layer, and actually edit the change that you made if needs be. So if someone asks you to make a change or something like that, you're not stuck with the new version that you created. You can actually go back in here in your layers, hide things, get back to what you had before. So there you go. That's pretty much it. I'm not going to cover too much more than this because that's already enough. There's obviously a lot more things that we can do with this, but we'll look at that a little bit later. But one last thing that I want to cover with this is, when you have your selection like this, it's not game over. So whenever you select, an image here, as you can see, I can see the color that I have selected. But if I click on this mask, it automatically switches to black and white. So I can actually paint on this mask. I don't have to just use selection for it. So of course, I can add to the selection. So let's say I'm going to go hit the polygonal lasso tool, and then I'm going to draw on this. So I'm going to make a selection like this, and then I'm going to paint inside of it with my brush. And there you go. So now I can do the same here. Of course, this doesn't look that great. And instead, what I'll do is I'm actually going to paint the inside of this. So with my soft brush, once again, I still have it selected. So I'm going to go ahead and paint the mask. So as you can see here, I'm going to paint in white. And look at the little icon, the little thumbnail here, update as I paint on it. There we go. So you can see a little line here. I'm adding to the mask. So whenever you have a mask that you've created, you're not stuck with it. You can always edit it and add to it, subtract to it, which is the power of layers. It makes things so flexible, and you can always go back and edit if needed. And now I have some new a new type of tea. There you go. And I just added the selection to this, and then there we go. So that's how you manage masks. There's a couple more things that I want to talk about. So we're going to go to a different image. So let's go to an actual portrait. So this is the portrait of just some supermodel, and what we're going to do with this is a couple edits to her face to show you kind of like the power of the technology behind Photoshop. So up until now, it's been pretty basic. All the stuff that I did were features that were there a long time ago. They've been with Photoshop for many years at this point. There's a couple things here that I want to talk about. So we're going to look at the healing brushes, the healing features that we have here, and then clone, and then liquefy for this. So three main features that I want to look at for this. So we're going to start with the first one here, the one at the top, and this is by far the one that's most impressive. So, and by the way, how I do this, how I expand. Whenever you have a menu like this, and the little arrow in the corner, the little triangle, all you have to do is click on it and hold, and it will show the rest of the menu. And then whatever you have selected here, whatever you select, that will become kind of like the new one that you can access quickly by just tapping on it. So I'm going to start with the first one here, Spot Healing Brush Tool. And we're going to look at what this actually does. This is one of the tools that are the easiest to play with. They just try their best to fix any problem with a surface. So obviously, having like moles is not a problem, but Photoshop will think of it that way, and then it'll try to fix it. So let's see what happens if I do just a brush stroke over the mole right here. So if you're very delicate with it, it's actually pretty damn impressive what it can do. Like, it's gone, right? And all I had to do is tap 3 times where I wanted it. So there's another one here. I'm gonna get rid of that. Bam, done. And then you can also do things a little bit more scary, like she doesn't need that eye. Oh, it's gone. So very powerful tool. The next one here, the healing brush tool. So this one's a little bit different. What you have to do first, so if you try to do something, if you try to paint on this, it's not going to do much, or at least it's not going to do what you think it will. You have to first click Alt, and it'll give you kind of like a little target, like this, a little crosshair. And then you have to click somewhere, and this is where it'll source. It'll source kind of like the textures from. So whenever you paint, let's say I want to blend in the nostrils here, as you can see here, it's using this area of the skin to try to replicate it wherever I'm painting, to make anything that's not like this disappear from this region. So if I alt click on the eye, for example, I'm going to try to add the eye back in here, which obviously doesn't work that well. But for anything else, or anything that's kind of just a surface, it works really well. And the beauty of this is that it also keeps the value of it. So I'm working in the shadows here, but still doing a really great job at making just that nose disappear. It's really creepy, but it works really well. And there you go. So another really powerful tool. So this healing brush, very interesting. Then we have the patch tool here. So that's another one that's pretty interesting. This allows you to, again, this will keep everything that's in the shadows and the highlights. It's not going to damage any of that. So but what it does essentially is allows me to duplicate things and move things around, a picture without looking like I did anything. So if I move this eye, actually I'm going to do it the wrong way first so you can see. So I'm going to move that using a regular selection. I'm just going to go ahead in here, select the lasso tool, and I'm going to move this eye. Obviously if I move the eye, and to move the eye you can just click Control and then click the center of the selection, or not the center, but anywhere inside the selection. Then you can move it somewhere else. So let's say I move it here. Obviously that doesn't work that well because there's now a white spot here. So let's say I want to duplicate it instead. So the way to do that, instead of holding Control and move, you hit Control Alt and then you move, and you'll see you have 2 little arrows now that indicates that it's actually going to be duplicated instead of just moved. So there we go. So now she has another eye, but you can obviously that this doesn't work. And well, not only that it doesn't work, but it's not even on the right side. But that's not the problem. But the lighting doesn't work. Like, it's way brighter than this side of her face. So we're gonna undo that, and instead I'm going to use this patch tool. But with this patch tool here, you can't do quite the same. So if I try to do this, you'll see what happens. You do the selection, and then you just have to click the center or somewhere inside the selection and drag. But it'll drag the other side. So it's kind of like the inverse. So I'm gonna undo that, and instead I'm gonna select this area here where there's no eye, where I want the eye to be. And again, I'm gonna click inside the selection and drag it towards what I want. So I want the eye right there. And as you can see here now, the color is still off. You know, it's off like it was the first time we tried the selection. But if I let go, it's going to adjust the light for it. There you go. And now I can Control D to deselect, and the lighting of the face actually matches the new eye. So obviously she looks broken, but the lighting, everything fits, everything still works. So it's a really, really cool tool for that. And then that works anywhere. So, you know, of course it works well if it's the same kind of like canvas, so a face, but you know, you could very well add an eye onto her stomach right here. So you're gonna go and grab it. Actually, you're gonna grab the mouth and let it go. There you go. Now she has a mouth on her shirt. So obviously, you know, it doesn't blend that well because the contrast is pretty intense. You go from something really, really bright to something really dark. But yeah, you can see the power of it, like just with this one example. And then if it's not perfect, like around the eye here, like she's got some like dark spots, you can go ahead and select the spot healing brush or the healing brush tool, source somewhere around here, and then start to clean it up, brighten up. There you go. So now it's a little bit more subtle. So those are the tools. Content Aware Move tool. This is another one that's great. It does like a very similar thing. So you can move this around, and you just have to click and move. You don't have to do anything else. And let's say you drag it on here, hit Enter, and then it'll move whatever you selected onto the new location and try to make it blend as best as it can. So not perfect in this case, but still pretty good start. And then again, you can always go back to a healing brush, select a couple things here, Alt on the cheek to source from this area, and then try to blend those lines. Oops. So whenever you're painting, you can see, you know, the little arrow on her cheek right now. That's where it's sourcing it from. So if you go too far, you'll see it starts to source, you know, the hair. So obviously you don't want to go too far. But yeah, there we go. So not perfect again, but pretty good for something that was done so quickly. And next up, we're going to look at the clone tool here. So right underneath we have the brush tool. So that we'll look at that later in more details. But now we have the clone stamp and pattern stamp. Pattern stamp, if you select that, what you have up here is suddenly a place where you can, you know, select a pattern. So let's say I select, you know, this pattern here, whatever. And of course you can have your own patterns. You can have you can import like skin textures in here, whatever you want. But what it does is it'll source from that. So whenever you paint, it'll just paint that pattern. So the other one that's interesting though is the clone stamp tool. So very similar to the healing brush tool. It's very, very similar, except it's not going to do any correction on its own. So it'll just, wherever you source, again, you're going to click somewhere. It'll bring the little crosshair. You select where you want, and then if you paint somewhere else, it'll source exactly that. So it's not gonna try to arrange the light. It's not gonna try to match anything. It'll just literally take whatever's here and then paint it somewhere else, as you can see right here. So if I click on the eye and draw it here, then the eye is gonna be drawn there. And then of course I didn't draw it in the right spot, but you know, if I draw something like this, there you go. Now the eye is back. So it's another tool, you know, like this is great for a bunch of different. It has a lot of different uses. You know, if you don't want Photoshop to be doing too much of the heavy lifting when it comes to adjusting the light and things like that. If you want the full control, there you go. That's kind of like the tool for you. And you can do a lot of really interesting things with this. And right now I'm only sourcing from this one file, but if I wanted to, you know, when you're sourcing at the beginning with the Alt, you can Alt click in here. So if I click on the T and then I go back in here, the T is still the source. So whenever I paint, it's going to, well, actually now I had the mask selected. So let's say I select this image here, and then I'll click again, Alt click. If I go back to my portrait, or is it here, and if I try to paint, you'll see I'll just paint the T instead. So in this case, it doesn't make much sense, but let's say you have a bunch of different skin textures and you're trying to create kind of like a bunch of skin folds, or like pimples and things like that, and you're trying to make her look really ugly, or add like a bunch of like scars onto her face, and you can source those from different photos and then use the clone stem tool to add those to her. And then you can do the same with the spot healing as well. Alright, so the last thing I want to try to play with is the liquify. So this is the one. This is one that's actually really useful in a bunch of different scenarios, but especially for photo. So the photographers will use this to slim down models, for example. So that's kind of like the famous part for it. And as you can see here, I'm not doing anything, and this is only it's only doing this in the later versions of Photoshop. I don't know when it started exactly, but you won't have that feature on older versions. You will have liquify, but it's not gonna like spot the outline of the hair, the face, like it's doing right now. So I'm not doing anything. It's just like wherever I put my cursor, like it knows that it's an eye, it knows that this is a face, and then this makes it really easy. And this is because of this little portrait face tool here. So when you have this selected and you're working on a face, you can do all kinds of things. So you can start moving things around, kind of like what you can do on your phone. You can make your mouth bigger, her mouth smaller, her nose lower, higher. And then here you have all the sliders. It's like a video game when you're creating your character. You can do a bunch of different things here, fine tune it. Yeah, it's pretty cool, the kind of stuff that you can do. And then but this is for the face version. So I'm gonna hit OK for this. There you go. Before, after, and now I'm gonna go back into liquify. So that was the face tool, and this will only work if you have a face that's really obvious, that it can detect, that Photoshop can detect. But I'm gonna get out of this mode, so I'm gonna just click on something else here. So the forward warp tool, which is the one that you'll use most of the time if you're not working on a face. So if you're trying to move like I don't know, make a balloon look bigger, or make a balloon look smaller, or something, whatever it is. That's the tool that you're gonna be using. And then the hotkeys don't work in this mode for some reason, so you have to use the slider here, or you can actually click and drag using this here. But if you have the C and V hotkeys, those are not gonna work in here. But you can still use this. So what this does is you click and you move, click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, and then you can do like some really cool modifications this way. It deforms everything really well, so you can fool a lot of people this way. That's why they get away with people not noticing in the magazines, because it's just it's a really powerful tool. You can do a lot of different things with it. And it keeps the image, it keeps like all the hard edges around the face really crisp, or at least as crisp as they were. And it allows you to do like some pretty crazy deformations. And there we go. So those are all the tools that I wanted to cover for this particular photo. Now we only have a couple more things, since it should be pretty quick. And this is going to be with this image here. I want to look at transformations. And so we're going to be using a lot of the tools that we've seen so far, and transformations are pretty interesting. So let's see. I'm going to grab a house. I'm going to duplicate it a couple times. So I'm just going to do a quick selection right now. To do selection, like what I'm doing right now, press the L hotkey. As you can see at the top left here, my lasso tool, not lasso tool, the selection tool has been selected. So that's what I'm doing now. Doing the selection around this little house really quickly. Now I have the house selected. So what can we do with this? So of course, if we click Control, we can move this house around. But obviously that's not gonna look that great. We can click Control Alt and move it around. So now we can actually duplicate it and maybe place it somewhere else. But then we can do transform. So what I'm gonna do here is with this selected, I've just selected the house. I'm gonna click Control J. Control J. What it does is that it creates a new layer based on the selection that I have. So I had the house selected, and you can see here it created a new layer with only the house on it. So now I can just move this house around. And to move things around, it's always you click Control and then you click Control and then click with the pen and then drag. So click and drag, click and drag. And what can I do with this now? So what I'm going to try is do a transformation on this. So the transformation is really, really nice. The way to do a transform is to do Control T for transform, and then this is going to bring this little box here around whatever you have selected. So right now I'm doing a Control T on the entire layer, and then the entire layer is this thing here. So this is all I have. So it's going to do a transform around whatever it can find within the layer. But if I were to do it on on this whole image, for example, if I do Control T on this, well, it's not going to work because it's a background. But let's say I say Control A to select everything. So just like a text editor, if you select Control A, it just selects the whole thing. And then after that, you can do a Control T for a transform. I'm going to do that. And then that you're in transform mode because you see those little squares all around the edges. And then what this allows you to do is if you drag them, you can actually stretch the image like this. Or if you click Control and then click on one of those edges, you can actually tweak the perspective of it. So if you don't click on anything, if you just click on those edges, you can change the you can transform the width and the height. But if you click on Control and then click the corners, you change the perspective of it. So this way. So obviously this doesn't work great on the background image, but we're going to deselect everything and then go back to here, and then I'm gonna do Control T again on this little house here. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna place this somewhere else, and I'm gonna try to make it work. So I'm gonna place it here, then I'm gonna shrink it down. So when you hold Shift, when moving a corner, it'll actually shrink the whole thing together. If you don't, it'll shrink. It won't maintain the ratio. But if you press Shift while you're scaling it up and down, it'll actually keep the house the way it is. It won't distort it. And now I can click Control on the corners here to change the perspective of the house, so that it matches a little bit more what the other houses are looking like. Maybe something like this. And then I'm going to click Enter. And then there we go. So that would be my new house. So actually works pretty well there. So if you didn't know, it could totally fit in this. So there we go. I changed the house with a transformation, moved it around, and it actually fits into its new spot pretty well. All right, now I undid this, went back a little bit in time in the history, and we're going to look at other deformations that we can do. So let's say that instead, now I still have my layer here. So let's say instead I want to place this house somewhere else. So I want it to be perpendicular to the street here. So if I want to start like a different street or something like this. So one more thing that I can do when you hit transform, so Control T is going to bring up the little squares here so that I know that I'm in transform mode. You can right click on this box, and let's try that. So with the cursor inside the box, try to right click it. And then there's a couple more transforms that we can do here. So the obvious ones, flip vertical, flip horizontal. There you go, that's what it does. You can flip it. You can also rotate this shape. Or if you mouse outside the box, if you mouse right onto the little squares here, you can drag as you know. But if you hover just outside of it, the cursor changes slightly, and you can see here this cursor allows you to rotate it. And then when you press Shift at the same time, it'll snap it to certain angles. And you can tell the angle right next to the cursor here. 15%, 30%, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, etc., etc. So if you want to undo a transform at any point, you can either hit Enter and then do a Control Z, so it's going to revert it back to what it was before. Or if you're in Control like this, and then you do a flip horizontal, for example, and then you don't want that anymore, and you want to get out of the mode, you can simply press Escape while you're in transform mode, and it'll escape and revert back to what it was before. Now we're going to go back in transform mode, Control T, look at some other options here. So distort, skew, all of these, those are pretty self-explanatory, but one that is very interesting is the warp option here. So when you do warp, it creates a grid, and then you can click and move anywhere within that grid. Even outside, not outside, but even if you click on like the edges here, you can push it outside to deform your shape. So obviously with a building, it might not look the best, but you can think of many different like organic subjects that would. So there we go. We had a look at a lot of different tools and features here. So just to do a quick recap, we looked at layers, groups, different selection methods, masks, image adjustments, healing, different healing tools, clone tools, liquify, and transforms, and all the things that we can do with transformation. So this is going to wrap up this photo editing portion of the class. This first exercise for Photoshop for digital production is going to be all about digital pen control. So this is one exercise that some of you might want to skip if you're already really good at this. But for everybody that's just starting with a tablet, those are really good exercises to really get you used to the feeling of drawing on a surface and then seeing the result on a different screen, especially if you don't have a graphics display tablet. So really quickly, I'm going to run you through what those are here. So the first one here, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. As far as the brush that you should take, I'm going to show you how to select the brush in here. So you right click anywhere on the canvas, and then it'll bring like this box here. Obviously your brushes are going to be different, but you can go ahead in here and click the little gear icon, and then we're going to load up the basic brushes. So click on that and hit OK, and then this should load the basic set of brushes. So that's what we will need for now. And then for this first exercise, we're going to go ahead and select number 3. So size number 3, which is a pretty good size. You're able to see it pretty well. And for this exercise, it's important also to do it at a 100% resolution. So don't go too far, don't go too close. You want to be at 100%. And then very simple, you go from one line to the other as fast as you can, and as make sure that the line is as straight as possible. Of course, don't hold shift while you're doing the line, because obviously you can get those straight lines like this really easily. That's not the point of this. The point is to focus on dexterity and hand-eye coordination. So there we go. The other exercise in here is simply it's very similar to the first one, except you should be splitting this box in half, and then try to have as many lines as possible in here without them touching each other. So always go in half. Of course, the bigger the lines, the bigger your brush, the fewer lines you'll be able to do. So make sure that you use a small-ish brush, so 1 pixel, 2 pixel, 3 pixel max. Yeah, the initial challenge isn't really there. It's really when you get to this point here where you're really trying not to touch the other lines and still trying to split them in half as many times as you can. So this is a really good exercise for dexterity, especially if you're drawing on a regular tablet. So you get the idea. Next up here, very simple again, you just trace those circles. So you have some nice lines here. The idea is to go over those and try to match them as closely as possible while doing only one stroke. So you don't want to be doing this, for example. Don't want to be doing that. That's not the idea. The idea is to do it in one stroke, and that's the same rule essentially for all of these. You do it in one stroke. So you don't want to do like small strokes like this. You go in one go. There you go. Okay, and then for this last example down here, all we want to do is reproduce those strokes here, and of course as many times as possible. So don't just do it once and then quit. The idea is to be really good at doing those gradients here. This is really how this is a really important dexterity skill to have when it comes to painting digitally using a tablet. So what we're going to do is select within the same brush, the basic brush set in Photoshop default. We're going to select again the 61 and maybe make it a little bit bigger, up to 70. So as you can see here, 70 pixels. And then what you want to do is just very, very lightly press at the top, and then as you go down, press harder and harder so that you get a nice smooth gradient. And of course, never letting go. It's just one stroke. So something like this should be pretty good. And now for the other ones here, simply go ahead and click on that little icon here. So always use pressure for size. Enable that, and without changing the brush, we can do again those first two here. So very lightly, and then this also manages the size. So you want this nice like baseball bat shape. So when you see these things at the top here, that's not good. Try again. So you want to get really good at getting this nice gradient and gradual increase in the shape of the brush as you go down. And then for this last one here, the one that's completely opaque, we can disable this one here. This one that says always use pressure for opacity. So we can disable that one, and then this will only give us, it won't manage opacity. It'll only manage the size of the brush. So again, you want to start really small, and as you go down, increase in pressure to get something like this as clean as possible with as few of these little waves as possible. Have fun. Alright, here is another set of pretty basic exercises, but those should be really good to get you used to using the different adjustment tools, image adjustment features that we looked at. So I'm going to go quickly over all of them, just to explain a little bit what those are. So first one here, essentially what you're going to be using is the hue saturation tool. So Control U to bring it up, and then the goal is to, with the first circles of each row, to try to match the second circle color. So try to match the color as perfectly as possible. So you're going to be using this tool for this, and this tool only. So don't go in here or anything like that. You just have to worry about those initial sliders that you see here when you open this tool. So yeah, let's try this one. Oops. So to make sure that we only modify this one here, I'm gonna select it. So select this and then Control U to bring this back up. Alright, so I'm gonna start with adjusting the lightness for it, making it a little bit brighter, a little bit more saturation, a little bit darker maybe. Alright, that's pretty close. Alright, so this is the exercise. Essentially trying to match those spheres. And then if you wanna see how close you are to the actual, to the real color, what you can do is bring this up right here, bring the color picker, and then color pick this color, the result that you created, and then color pick the other one here, and try to see how much this thing here moves. In the best case scenario, it wouldn't move at all. And then just quickly here, I think this would need to be a little bit darker, like this. But then yeah, so you can bring this up, color pick both, and see if it moves. If it doesn't move, it means that you're spot on. If it moves a little bit, see, mine moves a little bit. So it was a little bit lighter. So let's see. I think maybe I had it before I made the change. Like this, like this. So that's a lot closer. So I had it a little bit closer before. But as you can see here, those two colors pretty similar. So yeah, that's the idea, to train your eye with color first, to recognize and be able to match colors, and of course to be able to use those tools to try to gain those colors back. Next one, it's going to be using the levels and the curves features and tools that we've looked at. So for both these images, the idea is to get back this image here on the right. So using a combination of both, or just one of them, depending on how good you are with them. So and of course you don't have to do it in one go, so you can go ahead and bring Control M. So for like the curves, play around with the curves, and then if you think, oh well, I can't do it all in one go, so maybe you can hit OK and then come back. So that's completely fine to do that. But yeah, the idea is to just get back this image here. So I would say I'm pretty close already. And of course, to know if it matches or not, what you can do is you can duplicate this image here, the resulting image, Control J, and then you can move it over the other one, try to line them up, and then hide and show, hide and show. As you can see here, it's not perfect, so the clouds here are different, and this is how you can verify your results with the original. So that now you know that, okay, so the highlights, there's a little bit of contrast that's missing there, so you can go back and try again. And then the same thing with this one here. This one here, the third one, this is going to be all about control balance. So Control B, we'll select the first one, and we want to match this image here on the right. Again, Control B. So this is going to be what we see, and of course, in this case, we're gonna use the sliders, the 3 sliders here, but we can also use the different tone balance. So to modify the darker tones or the highlights. So of course, always start with the midtones. This is the exercise, and then the last one here is a combination of all 4. So there's no restriction to what you can use. You can use color balance, you can use the different hue, the levels, or the curves to get back this image right here. And of course, I'm not going to show you how I do it. That's for you to figure out. And that is going to be this set of exercises. Have fun! This next assignment is going to be all about combining images. So we're going to be using a lot of the skills that we talked about previously. So a lot of layers, grouping, clipping masks, selection and transforms, and also image adjustments. So the vast majority of the different features that we looked at we're going to be using in this case. And the assignment is essentially to collect a couple different images of your choice. It can be more or less depending on how comfortable you are with this. So if you're just starting, you might want to combine just 2 of them, for example. And we're going to combine them into a new scene, as you can see on the right, and essentially creating your dream house or dream castle or whatever this is. So the person in there, that's a photo of me, and then of course you can grab just random images on the internet to get started with this. So in my case, I have 4 images, and I'm gonna just kind of introduce and ease you in to the process here, and then I'm gonna let the video play. So this is just going to be a quick video of my own assignment. Like an example of the things that you should be doing. So what I'm starting with here is with the images that I've collected. Obviously there's certain elements in those that I want, and then there's a lot of stuff that I don't want. So the first step is to always kind of just select the things that you want to keep. So I'll make a selection around this this castle here. You can see that I'm I'm not selecting everything, so I'm not going to select all the little spikes here that you can see, so that it doesn't take me too long. And this is the kind of stuff also that I know that the castle is going to be relatively small in the image, so all those details are probably not going to be seen too much anyways. But of course, if you want to save some time, you can select a castle that's a little bit simpler, or just a regular house or a regular building like a skyscraper, for example, something that's easier to select. Once I have my selection done, I can erase the things that I don't want, and now I have my castle isolated onto its own layer, so I can move it around, try to see where it fits best. For this exercise, it's best to get images that are kind of flat without too much perspective. Otherwise, you're gonna have to worry about that on top of everything else. So it's preferable to get a background that's fairly flat with a a straight horizon, and something that's kind of like in the middle of the image. So horizon not too far from the top or too low. So like the one I have right now is pretty good. And then you'll want to find buildings or other elements that are in the same kind of perspective. So from a distance, kind of flat looking. Alright, now I have my house isolated, so I can try to place it around, see where it would fit best. Of course, in this case, I'm placing the buildings on top of a lake. If you don't want to have to worry about kind of like the reflections and that kind of stuff, you can just grab an environment or a landscape that is just full of grass or other non-reflective materials. So the last part here, I'm going to crop myself out of this image again really quickly. And in here I'm using the selection to go fast, but if you have a really complex thing that you want to kind of extract, or if you have something that's not something that has kind of like blurred edges or things like that, you might want to use, as you remember, a quick mask instead. Now I'm just going to go and use the healing tool to get rid of kind of like the snowflakes that you see on my outfit there. So it looks a lot better. Now what I'm going to be doing now is creating some clipping masks. So all I have to do is create a new effect, and then right click the name of it, and then select clipping mask. And then this is going to essentially create a clipping mask for whatever's underneath, what layer is directly underneath. As you can see here, there's a little arrow to the left right next to the eye pointing down. So this arrow indicates that it's affecting only what is found on the layer right underneath. And now I'm gonna just adjust the saturation, the hue, the color balance to get something that matches the environment a little bit more. So I want something that's a little bit more blue, purple, and a little bit more desaturated because it's in the distance. So as we can see here, the mountains themselves are almost just like a silhouette because they're far in the distance. So I want to try to achieve something similar, not as intense, but something kind of similar for the castle itself, because it also is in the distance to some degree. And now with those two clipping masks, I am going to just duplicate them and then bring them over, and then set them as clipping mask for the house as well, so that I start with something that's similar for both. And of course, each images, they're not coming from the same image, the same picture, so I have to tweak them independently, which is what I'm doing right now. and they might not use the same kind of clipping masks or layer styles, depending. So in this case here, I'm adding some extra ones to the castle to give me a little bit more flexibility with what I can do. And there's nothing scientific behind any of this. I'm really just eyeballing the color of the house and the castle so that it kind of matches the image as best as I can. What I do on the other end is look at the thumbnail on the top right and see if anything stands out too much. So when you look at an image from a distance like this, it's a lot easier to pick up if something is like clearly out of place. If things look alright in a thumbnail, then there's a good chance that it'll look alright on the full image as well. And when it comes to choosing your images, it's always best also to select images that are in a similar environment. So let's say you have it's like a sunny day out for your landscape, then you might want to select or choose photos that are in a similar environment, because it'll just save you a lot of troubles when you're combining those images together. So what I'm doing next is I'm duplicating my layers, and then I'm doing a transform and then flipping them vertically and then shrinking them a little bit also. And this is going to be the reflections. So I'm going to do the same thing for both, for the castle and for the house. And obviously the color doesn't match, so I'm going to add a couple layer masks for this. Not layer masks, but a couple clipping masks. And then what I'm trying to match here, it's a lot more straightforward. It's all the shadows that you can see on the water. So the shadow of the mountains themselves. So that's the like violet color that I'm trying to get back with the reflections of my buildings. Then just erasing the bottom. And this is something else, but I'm going to go ahead and add a blur to it. So this is called a Gaussian blur, and it's very simple to use. It's just it has a value, and then the more you crank it up, the more it blurs the image. So you can get that into the filter menu. You go filter, blur, and then you'll find the Gaussian blur. And then once you do it, you can access it really quickly. It's the first thing you'll see when you open the menu. So that's what I did for the house as well. And now it kind of looks like the reflection is in the water. So it's not perfect, obviously, but it doesn't look that bad for something done so quickly. And the beauty with clipping masks is that you can always go back to them and try to, fine-tune a little bit more, especially when you have a couple different elements in the picture. And now I'm just going to group things together so that it's a little bit easier to manage. I'm starting to have a good number of layers, so I'm going to split them by elements. So one group for the castle, one group for the house, and one group for me on there. So now that I did the reflection for the castle and the house, I need to add a shadow for myself, because otherwise I won't look too grounded. So again, I just did a quick blur again, same thing, and then I'm gonna darken my shadow. And of course that's probably too dark. but I can just change the opacity of this layer to tone it down a little bit. And then again, I'm going to erase a little bit to get that nice fade. There we go. So now I have my scene pretty much done. The elements are kind of working. So I'm going to collapse all the different layers, and then I'm going to do some final adjustments for the image. So I'm going to create some new layer styles here, and adjust the color balance a little bit to unify everything, give everything a nice tint. So this is not a clipping mask. As you can see here, this is affecting the entire image. And just like a clipping mask, I can always go back in there and kind of tweak them later. So it's a really nice way to add some final touch-ups to an image. There you have it. So this is going to conclude this this exercise, this assignment. I hope you have fun doing something similar. Alright, so this next set of assignments is going to be all about using the tools that we know so far, but pushing them a little bit further. So there's a couple extra things that I need to show you to get the best results as possible. So I'm going to quickly go over the three different exercises and then kind of fill up the missing information that you might have to be able to achieve those, to get good results with those. So the first thing here, the first one is those apples. So essentially, I want to double, maybe triple, the amount of apples that's in this basket. So there's a number of ways that you can do this, of course, but it all comes down to selecting a couple apples and isolating them onto their own layers, and then kind of like duplicating those layers to add more and more apples. So I'll show you kind of like the end result. So this is it. And then what's good to know with this is you have to work with layers, of course. And then essentially what you'll want, I don't know if you can tell here, but my top layer is the same as my base essentially, but minus a couple apples. So as you can see here, this apple here in the back, those ones in the back that you really can't see much, those are not included in that top selection. And what this allows me to do is that it allows me to put like a bunch of other apples underneath, and then it'll seem like they're on top, kind of like behind my initial few here. And then it gives a pretty credible result. The one thing here that I wanted to show, and of course, there's many different ways to do this, and the idea is to try to avoid, even if you're copying the same apples over and over again, try to change them a little bit so that they don't always look the same. So for example here, we have those two apples here that are pretty similar. So one way to differentiate them would be to maybe get rid, so we're going to go with the spot healing, and maybe get rid of this spot here for this apple. And then another thing that we could do, maybe get rid of the stem. Get rid of that, so that this apple now looks a little bit different from the other one. And of course, you could push that even more. So what I could do, for example, is I can go down to this my top layer, my bottom layer, whatever, any layer that has apples on it, and then source maybe this bit here, and go back up here and use those highlights for this other apple, so that suddenly those two that used to look the same, now they're quite different. So there we go. And then there's one more thing that I wanted to show with this, and it is those two tools right here. So you can find them, not these ones, this one right here. So the little hand that you can see, normally it's on this icon here. This is the default one: dodge tool and burn tool. So essentially what those are is they're dodge tool will make everything brighter, and then burn tool will make everything darker. So you can quickly look at what this looks like here. If I go over the apples really quickly, as you can see here, this is the dodge tool, and then burn tool, as you've guessed, it's the opposite. It'll instead darken darken the apples. So, and it does it in a really nice way. It's very good for photos. You know, whenever you have something, whenever you're working with photos, this will work actually quite well. Now, why would you need it? Why would you need this in this case? Well, let's say you copy over a new apple. Like, let's say we're going to do it really, really rough. But let's say we copy over this one here. Control J to place it on its own layer. So now we have an apple on its own. And then let's say we place this apple like right here. So I'm going to cut out a little paper here real quick. Pretty dirty way of working, but it's just to give you kind of like the idea. So now I have my apple here, but if you look in the back, there's no, like, it doesn't cast any shadow onto the apple behind compared to these other apples. So if you have, you know, this one here, obviously, you know, you see a nice outline because there's some shadow here in the corner and the cracks where it meets the other apple. And there's no such thing here with this one, since I've just moved it and pasted it on here. So to create that depth, the feeling that this apple is actually in there with the other ones, one thing that you can do is with that layer selected, with that thing selected, you can lock the layer so that you can only paint within, you can only paint or, you know, affect what is on that layer and nothing else. So when you lock the layer, right now it's not locked, I can't draw anywhere, but the second that I lock it, I can only paint on the apple itself. And then with this, what you can do is go in here, select the burn tool, and then you have different options here. So if you want to darken the shadows, if you want to darken the midtones and the highlights, you'll find this come back always pretty often in Photoshop. So you have you're able to affect those three different kind of regions in the values. But we can try with the midtones first and see what this gives us. And then what I would want is to add a little bit of shadows at the bottom here. Alright, and then now that this one feels a little bit better, now I want to go on the layer underneath where those other apples are and darken those instead. So I'm going to try with the shadows here. No, it's the highlights that I want to darken. So if you do highlights, not that great because it adds a little bit too much black. So I'm going to try with shadows instead. And what I want is to add a little bit of a little bit of darkness, a little bit of shadows all around the new apple that I pasted there. Something like this. So that it looks like it's in front of the other ones, and then that this one is casting shadow onto the other ones. Don't want to do it too much. You know, you look at kind of like the rest of the apples, see the amount of shadows that's in there, so you don't want to go like super crazy so that this area stands out too much. It has to look like it belongs with the other ones. So I would say like something like this, you know, already looks a lot better, and it makes this apple fit in a lot more than it used to before. So you can go back and forth, before, after, and now it feels like it's actually part of this basket. So right here, color dodge and color burn. Those two tools, pretty useful for quick adjustments like this. This next exercise is going to be about transferring some information from one picture into the other one. And then so what I'm going to be trying to do here, and of course you can use, you know, your own photo and then maybe a photo of your parent. The idea is that they just have to be in a similar pose. So, you know, if you get like a front front mugshot, not mugshot, but a front portrait like this, this is perfect. So what I'm going to be doing here is you have to determine which is the target and which is the source. So this is going to be the target, and then the source file is going to be this one, the old guy. So the first thing I want to do, since I want to keep his highs, I'm going to split those out. So I'm going to go into quick mask mode. I'm going to paint the eyes. So this way, when I transfer some of the features from the older model, I'll make sure to keep the eyes of the younger one intact. And I really suck with the names of actors, so I don't remember this one. Sorry. I know it's an actor though. Alright, there we go. So something like this. Now we can exit this mode, Q, and then I'm going to invert the selection because right now everything is selected but the eye. So Control Shift I to invert my selection. And now with the eye selected, I'm gonna isolate them onto their own layer. So I'm gonna go ahead and click Control J. Alright, so now the eyes are separate. And well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and select the healing brush tool. We could also use the patch tool here, but I'm going to go ahead and select the healing brush and see what we can do with this. So going back here, I'm going to go into this image and source it from here. So press Alt to source from this image, and I'm going to go back in here, and then I'm going to paint. And then it's nice because you can see the eye here. If for any reason, you know, the eye or the details that you're painting are like way different in size because your two images are not the same size, what you can do is go into Window and click Clone Source, and this will bring up this little box here, and it looks a bit complicated, but essentially you can ignore the bottom half here, so ignore this section. The only thing that you want to pay attention to is these two boxes here where it says 100%, 100%. Alright, so nothing else. And then this, depending what you have selected, so for the, in this case here, it tells you this is the old .jpeg, which is this image here, and which is the source image. So let's say the eye was too small, for example. What you could do is to make this image bigger, and you can see it here on the actual target image. So it's really easy to make sure that everything is at the same size. So, you know, if it was too big like this, for example, you can scale it down all the way so that the details and the features of the face are going to match. So right now, obviously 100% works the best with these two images because they're the same size and almost the same pose. But if you have, you know, images that are not the same size, you might want to play with this in here just to adjust the scale a little bit. And then you can close it. And then I'm going to paint what I have right here. I'm going to try again. And of course, you know, the brush here that I'm using is a soft brush. So you can change the types of brush that you have here. So hardness, you know, I have my hardness set at the minimum so that I get a nice, so that the edges of my brush are not too harsh. So this way I feel like it blends it a little bit nicer. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and paint right here. Try to match the eye as much as possible. I'm going to go ahead and source the other side. Center the eye. Something like this, and then why not grab his nose at the same time. So here, you know, the nose is a little bit smaller, so I'm going to go in here. Oh, there we go, because I changed the scale somehow. So I'm going to get that back 100%. And there we go. Now he's got the nose of his dad. And the reason I wanted to keep the eyes in here is because now what we can do,
since around the eye it's not perfect, as you can see. There's like some stuff here that we might want to adjust. So what you can do now that you've done this step, and this is what I actually wanted to do to show you with this, is a feature with the liquify tool. So again, liquify in here, Shift Control X. Now, when you open the liquify tool for the first time, this is what you should see. You shouldn't be able to see the other layer, but we obviously want to see the eyes that we pasted on their own layers, so that we can kind of like move the folds and then the eyelids around the actual eyes of our target, not the source one. So what you want to do is click Show Backdrop. This is going to show the other layers in your project, and then the backdrop essentially is the thing, the layer that you'll be able to see, but that you can't edit. So the one that I see here is layer 1. So if you have all layers selected, I think the result's going to be, you're not going to be able to see the result when you actually move things around, so it's not good. So you want to make sure that your backdrop is isolated. Like you can see, like I moved stuff around and then it wasn't showing me. I just undid that. So I'm selecting the layer 1, which is the layer here, the top one that I don't want to be affected by my liquify actions. And this is the backdrop. It's called the backdrop. It's just there. It's visible, but you can't touch it. And then you can also play with its opacity. So if I drop it all the way down to 0, we're not going to see it anymore. And then you can bring it back. So sometimes you might want to have something like in between. But in this case, I'm going to go with 100%. And I'm going to move the eyelids around, not this one here, the top one. And you can move the eyelids around to make it match his eyes as best as possible. There we go, something like this. And there we go. So now we can click OK. Before, after. Now it works a lot better. So there you go. And then you can keep on doing this for the entire face. Add more and more wrinkles, or completely use a different image. Maybe someone that has a lot of scars, or whatever you want. But this is the liquify tool with the backdrop. This is kind of important if you're working with a bunch of different layers. And this last exercise is going to be all about liquify. So I have 2 images in here, and of course you can use any image that you want. The only thing that you want to make sure of is that they're in the same kind of position, so their head, to make sure that you're able to properly liquify. So what I want to do with this, in my particular case, I mean, again, you can do whatever you want, but what I wanted to do is transform this alien image and give it this woman's features as best as I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this over. So you click Control, or you can also click on the layer here. As you can see here, you see the little hands that's grabbing the layer. Then you can drag that onto the other onto the other image, and it'll bring it in as a new layer. So we're going to look at how things are centered, and of course it's pretty well centered because I made it so. But if not, make sure that you move around your image so that it matches the head as best as possible. Of course, it's not going to match 100%, especially not in this case. It's an alien, an alien and a person. So, but try to make it match as best as you can. All right, so we can get rid of this one here. Now, I'm going to go full screen. Press F. Now again, we're going to go into liquify, the liquify tool. Shift Control X. And this is what we're going to see. So again, if you haven't used the backdrop yet, make sure that you do now. And in this case, if I click backdrop, it's a little bit different. So the order is never the same. So in this case, we're going to set this up so that it actually works. Right now, if I try to do anything on here, I'm not going to see anything. So I just did a Control Z there, so that I undid what I just did. So what you'll want to do here is to set the background as the backdrop. So this is the one that you're not going to be able to touch, remember. The backdrop is the image that is there. It's the reference image, but you cannot edit it. And then what we're going to do is drop the opacity of the backdrop a little bit, because we want to see the alien, because we're going to be deforming the alien, trying to match this face as best as we can. So I want to be able to see both at the same time at like something like 50% should probably be good. Something like this. And then, yeah, using just this regular one here, we could use the face, I believe, but I'm not sure. Yeah, it sees the alien as a face, but this is kind of limited, this mode, so I prefer the good old Forward Warp tool. This way we can do big modifications. So we're just going to move things around. Slowly, little by little, moving things around, nudging things around, and trying to match first the contour of her face. Maybe bring this in. And at any time you can always go to 0% so that you can see just the face that you're working on, and then the target. I'm going to lower the nose. If you want to work in more detail, you can make the brush size smaller. I'm going to bring the eye down. Those big eyes need to shrink down quite a lot. But the beauty with this is that it's actually completely doable, and then you'll see the results actually pretty crazy. So just trying to match everything as best as I can. So that this alien looks a little bit more human. Alright, let's see what we have. There you go. So the eye here is starting to look a little bit better. And of course we can always go back in here and edit if needed. I'm gonna push this in so that the head of the alien is not as wide. And if you get like stuff like this, at the top, don't worry about it. You can always push this out once you're done with the rest of the face. And what you want to try to avoid when you're working with transparency, with Liquify, is having the texture stretch too much. So right down here it's a little bit too stretched. So we can always relax those, kind of like move those back in position, trying to make sure that you don't notice that there's any warping going on. Of course, it's inevitable, especially in this case, since the change is so drastic, going from like really big eyes to human-sized eyes. But by pushing things around, and maybe going like with a smaller brush, you should be able to get a result that could fool most people, as if the human-looking alien was made this way from the beginning. So there you go. And then of course, there's a lot more work that we could be doing on this. And yeah, this is how you do it. So that is going to be that for this set of exercises.